Tonight, we begin a gentle journey into ancient wisdom that has guided countless hearts toward peace for thousands of years. These are the most basic truths of Zen Buddhism, and they hold within them secrets that can transform how you meet each moment of your life. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. There is nothing you need to accomplish here. These are not lessons to memorize or techniques to master. They are simply invitations to see life as it actually is, rather than how we wish it would be. And in that seeing, something shifts. Something softens. The ancient teachers found that peace is not something we must create or achieve. It is something we uncover. Like a clear lake that becomes cloudy when stirred, our minds settle naturally when we stop struggling against life as it is. There is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do. We will walk together through stories and teachings of people who discovered profound peace. And as we walk, the path itself will teach you what you need to know. Thank you for being here. Let's begin our journey together. The Buddha taught that there are three fundamental characteristics of all existence. Three basic truths that, when truly understood, become gateways to freedom. The first of these truths is impermanence. In the ancient language of the Buddha, this is called anicca. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same, not for a moment. This might seem obvious at first. Of course things change. The seasons turn. Our bodies age. Relationships evolve. We know this intellectually. But knowing something with the mind and understanding it with the whole of our being are two very different things. When we truly see impermanence, not just as a concept, but as the living reality of each moment, something profound shifts inside us. We stop trying to freeze time. We stop exhausting ourselves trying to hold on to what naturally wants to flow. And in that release, we discover a kind of trust we did not know was possible. The Zen masters teach that impermanence is not our enemy. It is our teacher. It is the force that allows life to renew itself. It is what makes each moment precious and unrepeatable. When we stop fighting against change and learn to move with it, we find a freedom that no amount of control could ever provide. Let us explore a story that shows how this understanding can transform even the greatest loss into a gateway to freedom. In the mountains of old Japan, there lived a Zen master named Kosen who had devoted more than 40 years of his life to collecting sacred texts. His monastery housed one of the finest Buddhist libraries in all the land. Scholars would travel for weeks just to glimpse the rare manuscripts he had gathered from across the empire. The library itself was beautiful beyond words. Wooden shelves rose from floor to ceiling, carved by master craftsmen generations ago. Each scroll was wrapped in silk and stored with meticulous care. The room smelled of cedar wood and aged paper. In the early morning, light would filter through paper windows, casting a golden glow over centuries of accumulated wisdom. Kosen would wake each day before the other monks and spend his first hours in this sacred space. He would read by candlelight, taking notes, copying passages, preserving the teachings for future generations. His life had found its purpose in this work of preservation. He saw himself as a guardian of the Dharma, keeping ancient wisdom safe from the passage of time. The other monks respected his devotion. Students would come seeking permission to study in the library, and Kosen would guide them carefully, teaching them how to handle the delicate scrolls, where to find specific teachings, how to understand difficult passages. His knowledge was vast. His dedication was complete. But one autumn night, everything changed. A fire started in the kitchen while the community slept. Fed by strong mountain winds, the flames spread with terrifying speed through the wooden monastery buildings. By the time the monks awoke, smoke filled the halls and flames licked at doorways. They scrambled from their sleeping quarters, helping each other to safety, but there was no time to save anything else. The library burned with particular intensity. All those ancient manuscripts, irreplaceable texts, precious scrolls collected over 4 decades. The dry paper caught fire like kindling. Within minutes, centuries of preserved wisdom turned to ash and smoke. The carved wooden shelves that had held such treasures became fuel for the hungry flames. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, the monks gathered in the courtyard. Their home was gone. Everything they had known was destroyed. They stood together in shocked silence, watching grey smoke rise from the blackened remains of their monastery. The younger monks looked around for their teacher, expecting to find him devastated by this immense loss. Master Kosen had poured his entire adult life into that library. Surely such destruction would break his heart. But when they found him, he was sitting calmly on a large stone near the temple gate. He was watching the smoke rise with eyes that held no trace of anger or despair. His face showed a peace that seemed impossible given what had just happened. One young monk could not contain his confusion. He approached his teacher with tears still wet on his cheeks. "Master," the student said, his voice breaking, "how can you sit so peacefully? Everything is gone. All those precious teachings you spent your life collecting. 40 years of work vanished in a single night. How can this not break your heart?" Kosen looked at his young student with eyes full of gentle understanding. He patted the stone beside him, inviting the monk to sit. "My dear friend," Kosen said softly, "those books contain beautiful words about truth. The finest explanations of the Dharma ever written. But they were not truth itself. They were fingers pointing at the moon. And I had become so focused on protecting those fingers that I sometimes forgot to look at the moon they were pointing toward." The young monk shook his head. "But Master, all that wisdom is lost now. Future students will never be able to read those texts. Centuries of teaching gone forever." Kosen smiled, and in that smile was something the student had never seen before. A lightness, a freedom. "The fire has given us a great teaching," the master said. "It has shown us what can be destroyed and what cannot. Paper burns. Wood burns. Buildings fall. But the truth those texts pointed toward cannot be touched by fire. It lives here." He touched his own chest. "And here." He touched the student's chest. The Dharma was never in the library. It was always in us, waiting to be lived rather than merely preserved. He stood slowly and looked out at what remained of the monastery. The other monks were beginning to gather their few remaining possessions, starting to think about rebuilding. "Yesterday I was a keeper of books," Kosen said. "Today I am simply a teacher. Yesterday I worried about preserving old words. Today I am free to embody their meaning directly. The fire has not taken anything away. It has revealed what was always here." In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Without his vast library to manage and protect, without ancient texts to study and preserve, Master Kosen's teaching became more direct and powerful than it had ever been. Students who came expecting to study old manuscripts instead met a living embodiment of the wisdom those texts had tried to capture. The master had discovered something profound. His attachment to preserving the Dharma had, in subtle ways, prevented him from fully expressing it. The fire had freed him from being a curator of truth and allowed him to become truth itself. This story shows us something important about the nature of change. Master Kosen's library was precious to him. He had devoted his life to its care. But his attachment to preserving these texts had become a subtle form of bondage. He thought he was protecting the Dharma, but he was actually limiting how he could express it. The fire was not his enemy. It was his teacher. It burned away what he thought he needed and revealed what he actually had. When everything he had carefully preserved turned to ash, he discovered that the wisdom he sought to protect had never been in the scrolls at all. It had been in him the whole time, waiting to be lived rather than merely studied. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about impermanence. Change is not something that happens to us occasionally. It is the fundamental nature of existence itself. Everything we think is solid and permanent is actually in constant flux. Our bodies, our possessions, our relationships, our circumstances. All of it is flowing, transforming, becoming something else. When we fight against this truth, when we try to hold on to things exactly as they are, we create suffering for ourselves. We exhaust our energy trying to prevent the inevitable. But when we understand that change is not our enemy, but the very force that allows life to renew itself, we can finally relax. We can appreciate what we have while we have it and release it gracefully when it changes form. Master Kosen's peace in the face of great loss came from this understanding. He had spent 40 years building and protecting his library. When it burned, he could have been destroyed by grief. But instead, he saw the fire as a teaching. It showed him that he had been clinging to something that was always temporary. And in releasing that attachment, he found a freedom he had never known before. The teaching of impermanence invites us to live with open hands, to love deeply without grasping, to care for things while knowing they will not last forever. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about loving so completely that we want what is best for whatever we love, even if that means letting it change and transform. When we truly understand that everything changes, we stop trying to freeze time. We stop exhausting ourselves trying to prevent the inevitable. Instead, we learn to appreciate what is here right now, knowing that this moment is precious exactly because it will not come again. Master Kosen discovered this when his library burned. And we too can discover it, not by studying it as a concept, but by opening our eyes to the reality that is already here. Everything around us is teaching this truth. The seasons change. Our breath flows in and out. Thoughts arise and dissolve. The body grows and ages. Nothing stays still. And in that constant movement, there is a kind of peace. Not the peace of things staying the same, but the peace of trusting the flow. Not the peace of control, but the peace of acceptance. When we stop fighting the river, we can finally learn to swim. When we stop resisting change, we discover that we are strong enough to meet whatever comes. This is the first gateway, the gateway of impermanence. Let yourself rest in this understanding. You do not need to grasp it with your thinking mind. Simply allow it to settle into your being like rain soaking into earth. The truth of change is already working in you, already transforming you, already guiding you toward the freedom that comes from seeing life as it actually is. As we move forward in our journey together, this understanding of impermanence will continue to unfold, revealing deeper layers of wisdom. But for now, simply breathe. Simply be. Let yourself be carried by the flow of this moment, trusting that everything is exactly as it needs to be. The second basic truth that the Buddha taught is perhaps the most misunderstood. In the ancient language, it is called dukkha. This word is often translated as suffering, but it means something broader and more subtle than that. Dukkha points to the way life includes difficulty, disappointment, and pain as part of its natural fabric. It is the truth that things do not always go according to our wishes, that our human hearts are tender and can be hurt. When we first hear this teaching, it can sound pessimistic. Life includes suffering. This seems like dark news. But the Buddha was not teaching pessimism. He was teaching honesty. He was inviting us to stop pretending that life should be free of difficulty and to start meeting it with open eyes and an open heart. And here is the remarkable thing. When we stop running from pain, when we stop pretending it should not be there, something beautiful happens. Our hearts naturally open. The very suffering we tried to avoid becomes the doorway to compassion, to kindness, to a tenderness that embraces all of life, both the joy and the sorrow. The Zen masters teach that our difficulties are not obstacles to awakening. They are the path itself. When we meet our pain with gentle awareness, when we stop judging ourselves for hurting, when we extend understanding to others who are struggling, we discover that the tender heart is also the wise heart. The compassionate heart is also the peaceful heart. Let us explore a story that shows how meeting suffering with understanding can transform what seems like harm into healing. In a small village, there lived a baker named Kenji who was known throughout the region for his kind heart and generous spirit. Every morning before dawn, he would light his ovens and begin preparing fresh bread for the day. The smell of baking would drift through the narrow streets, waking people gently and filling them with anticipation for the warm loaves they would buy. Kenji had a simple practice that he had followed for many years. He would always bake a few extra loaves each day and leave them on a wooden shelf outside his shop. A small sign hung above the shelf that read, "For those who need them." Travelers, poor families, anyone who was hungry could take what they needed without having to ask or explain their circumstances. This small act of kindness was simply part of how Kenji lived. But one harsh winter, when snow lay thick on the ground and food became scarce throughout the region, desperate times came to the village. A group of men who had lost their work at a distant mine found themselves with no means to feed their families. They had tried begging, but the villagers themselves had little to spare. In their desperation, they began stealing from shops and homes, taking whatever they could find under cover of darkness. Kenji's bakery was robbed 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time, the thieves took not just the free bread from the shelf outside, but also money from his cash box and flour from his stores. The 3rd time, they also broke several of his baking tools and overturned his carefully organized workspace, perhaps in frustration at finding less money than they had hoped. The other villagers were outraged on Kenji's behalf. They came to his shop with anger in their voices. "You must stop leaving bread outside," they told him. "You are just encouraging them. Put bars on your windows. Get a large dog to guard your shop at night. Show these criminals that you will not be an easy target. But Kenji continued his practice. Each morning he would arrive to find his shop disturbed, sometimes damaged. He would clean up quietly, repair what he could, and bake his bread as usual. And still, he left the extra loaves on the shelf outside, though now they disappeared even more quickly than before. One particularly cold night, when the wind howled through the village streets and frost covered every surface, Kenji was working late. He was preparing dough for the next day's baking, his hands moving through the familiar motions of kneading and shaping. The work brought him peace, even after the difficulties he had faced. He heard a sound at his front door. Footsteps in the snow. Whispered voices. He looked up and saw shadows moving outside his shop window. Instead of hiding or calling for help, Kenji did something that surprised even himself. He walked to the door and opened it. 3 men stood there in the cold. Their faces were thin with hunger, their clothes torn and inadequate for the winter weather. They had clearly come to steal again, but they froze when they saw Kenji looking at them directly. "You must be very cold," Kenji said softly, "to be out on such a bitter night." The men did not know how to respond. They had expected to find the shop empty, to take what they needed and disappear back into the darkness. They had not expected kindness. "I have soup cooking," Kenji continued. "And there is fresh bread just out of the oven. Would you like to come in and eat?" The oldest of the 3 men, who seemed to be their leader, looked suspicious. "Why would you help us? You know who we are. We are the ones who have been taking from you." Kenji nodded calmly. "I know. And I can see that you take only what you need to survive. A man does not steal bread because he is evil. He steals bread because he is hungry." He stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "The winter is hard for everyone, but it does not have to make us into enemies." Slowly, cautiously, the 3 men entered the warm bakery. The contrast between the bitter cold outside and the warmth of the ovens was so strong that one of them began to weep quietly. Kenji pretended not to notice. He simply served them bowl after bowl of hot soup and all the fresh bread they could eat. As they warmed up and filled their empty stomachs, they began to talk. Their story came out in pieces. They had all worked at the same mine until it closed suddenly. With no work available and their savings gone, they had been forced to live in the forest. They had tried begging, but the village was poor itself this winter. Stealing had seemed like their only option for survival. "We never wanted to hurt anyone," the youngest one said, his eyes filling with tears. "We just did not want our families to starve." Kenji listened to their story with deep attention, asking gentle questions, understanding the desperation that had driven them. When they finished eating, he made an offer that astonished them. "I could use help with the early morning baking," he said. "The work is hard and the hours are long. But there is always enough food, and there is a room above the shop where you could sleep. If you are willing to work, you are welcome to stay." The 3 men looked at each other in disbelief. They had come to steal from this man, and he was offering them jobs and shelter. The oldest man shook his head slowly. "Why would you trust us?" he asked. "We have robbed you. We have damaged your property. We could steal from you again." Kenji smiled gently. "Because I believe that people do better when they are given the chance to do better. You stole because you were desperate. But desperation is not who you are. It is just a situation you found yourselves in. Now you have a choice to make about who you want to be." The men stayed. They worked harder than any employees Kenji had ever had, grateful beyond words for the chance to earn an honest living. Within a few months, the bakery was more prosperous than it had ever been. The three men proved to be skilled workers, and their gratitude translated into dedication and care. The village became safer as well. With these men no longer desperate, the stealing stopped. Other villagers began to see them differently, not as threats, but as members of the community who had been struggling and were now contributing. Years later, when people asked Kenji why he had chosen kindness over punishment, why he had offered work to men who had robbed him, he would say something simple. Fear creates more fear. Anger creates more anger. But compassion has the power to transform even the most difficult situations. When we respond to suffering with understanding instead of judgment, we give everyone involved the chance to become better than they were before. This story shows us something essential about the Buddhist understanding of suffering and compassion. Kenji could have responded to the robberies with anger and fear. He could have hardened his heart, put bars on his windows, sought revenge. This would have been understandable. He had been wronged. His livelihood had been threatened. But Kenji understood something deeper. He saw that underneath the harmful actions of these men was suffering. They were not evil people who enjoyed causing harm. They were desperate people caught in circumstances that seemed to offer no good choices. They were hungry. They were cold. They were afraid for their families. When Kenji met their actions with compassion instead of anger, he created the conditions for transformation. He did not excuse what they had done. He did not pretend that stealing was acceptable. But he looked past the behavior to see the pain that was driving it. And in seeing their suffering clearly, he was able to respond with wisdom rather than react with fear. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about dukkha and compassion. Suffering is part of the human experience. All beings experience pain, fear, and difficulty. When we can see this clearly, when we understand that harmful behavior often comes from a place of hurt, we naturally feel compassion arise. Not as something we force ourselves to feel, but as the natural response of a heart that truly understands. Kenji's compassion was not weakness. It was strength. It took courage to open his door to men who had robbed him. It took wisdom to see past his own anger and fear to recognize their desperation. And it took confidence in his own understanding of human nature to offer them a second chance. The transformation that followed was not magic. It was the natural result of meeting suffering with understanding. The men were not bad people who needed to be punished. They were struggling people who needed support and opportunity. When they received compassion instead of condemnation, they were able to show who they truly were beneath the desperation. This teaching about compassion extends in all directions, outward toward others who are struggling, but also inward toward ourselves. This brings us to another dimension of this gateway to freedom. There was once a young woman named Miki who came to study at a mountain temple renowned for its meditation practice. She had heard stories of monks who could sit in perfect stillness for hours, their minds clear and peaceful. She wanted desperately to achieve this same level of spiritual attainment. Miki threw herself into the practice with fierce determination. She would rise at 3 a.m. to meditate before the other students awakened. She would sit through meals in silence, barely eating, focused entirely on her spiritual progress. She pushed herself to meditate for longer periods than anyone else, often sitting until her legs went completely numb and her back ached with pain. But instead of the peace and clarity she sought, Mickey found her mind becoming more agitated than ever before. During meditation, instead of gently observing her thoughts, she would attack each wandering thought with harsh criticism. "Focus," she would command herself. "Stop being so weak. Other students can do this easily. What is wrong with you?" When her meditation felt scattered, she would punish herself by skipping meals or adding extra hours of sitting. When she felt drowsy during practice, she would scold herself for being lazy. Her inner dialogue became a constant stream of judgment and disappointment. After months of this harsh treatment, Mickey was more miserable than when she had arrived. Her body was thin from skipping meals. Her mind was exhausted from constant self-criticism. Her heart felt heavy with shame about her perceived failures. One morning, after a particularly difficult meditation session where she had berated herself for every wandering thought, Mickey went to the temple's small garden to be alone. She sat beneath a cherry tree, tears streaming down her face, feeling like a complete failure as a spiritual student. Master Yuki, the temple's elderly teacher, happened to be walking through the garden. She saw Mickey's distress and sat down quietly beside her on the stone bench. "Tell me about your practice," Master Yuki said gently. Through her tears, Mickey poured out her frustration. She described her rigorous schedule, her constant self-criticism, and her disappointment at her lack of progress. "I try so hard," she said, her voice breaking. "But I am just not good enough. I will never be able to meditate like the other students. Maybe I should just give up." Master Yuki listened with compassionate silence. When Mickey finished, the teacher pointed to a small bird that had landed near their feet, pecking at the ground in search of seeds. "Watch this little bird," Master Yuki said. "See how naturally it moves. It does not criticize itself for not finding food quickly enough. It does not compare itself to other birds. It simply does what birds do, moment by moment, with complete acceptance of its own nature." Mickey watched the bird for several minutes. There was something peaceful about its simple presence, its lack of self-consciousness. "Now," Master Yuki continued, "imagine if this bird spent its time telling itself it was a terrible bird, that it should fly better or sing more beautifully. What would happen to its natural ability to find food and shelter? What would happen to its joy in simply being a bird?" Mickey understood immediately. It would be too busy criticizing itself to do what it naturally knows how to do. Master Yuki nodded. "You came here to learn peace and compassion. But the first place to practice these qualities is with yourself. How can you offer kindness to others if you show nothing but harshness to your own heart? How can you find peace in meditation if you are at war with your own mind?" The teacher's voice was filled with gentle warmth. "The path is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming kind. First to yourself, then to all beings. Your mind will wander during meditation. That is what minds do. The practice is not to stop this wandering, but to notice it with the same gentle affection you would show a beloved child who gets distracted while learning something new." From that day forward, Mickey changed her entire approach to practice. Instead of commanding her mind to focus, she would gently invite it back to the breath. Instead of criticizing wandering thoughts, she would acknowledge them softly and return to her meditation with kindness. When her body felt tired, instead of pushing through with harsh determination, she would adjust her posture or take a brief rest, treating her physical needs with respect. When difficult emotions arose during sitting, instead of judging them as obstacles, she would breathe with them gently, as she might comfort a dear friend in distress. The transformation was remarkable. Within weeks, Miki's meditation became naturally deeper and more peaceful. Her mind, no longer under constant attack, began to settle into the stillness she had been seeking. More importantly, the harsh inner critic that had tormented her for so long gradually softened into a voice of gentle encouragement. Years later, Miki became known for her compassionate teaching style and her ability to help struggling students find their way to genuine peace. When asked about her approach, she would say, "I learned that the kindness we show ourselves becomes the foundation for all the kindness we offer the world. We cannot give what we do not have, and we cannot find peace through fighting ourselves." Breathe gently now. Feel how your body naturally supports you without any effort on your part. The story of Miki shows us another essential aspect of this gateway of the tender heart. Compassion must include ourselves. In fact, it must begin with ourselves. If we treat our own struggles with harshness and judgment, we will never find the peace we seek. Miki believed that spiritual progress required harsh discipline and constant self-criticism. She thought that if she could just push herself hard enough, punish herself for every failure, and maintain perfect control over her wandering mind, she would eventually achieve peace. But this approach only created more suffering. Master Yuki helped her see that this harsh treatment was itself a form of violence. The inner critic that constantly judged and condemned her was preventing her from accessing the natural peace that was already present beneath the struggle. Her mind could not settle because it was constantly under attack. When Miki learned to treat herself with the same gentleness she would offer to a struggling child or a dear friend, everything changed. Her meditation deepened not because she forced it to, but because she stopped fighting against herself. Her mind settled not because she commanded it to, but because she created the conditions of kindness and acceptance in which settling could happen naturally. This teaching is especially important in our approach to spiritual practice and to life itself. Many of us carry an inner voice that is far harsher than we would ever be to another person. We criticize ourselves for being imperfect, for struggling, for having human limitations. We think this harsh treatment will motivate us to improve. But it does the opposite. It exhausts us and prevents us from accessing our natural wisdom and capacity for peace. The Buddha taught that all beings deserve compassion, and this includes ourselves. Our struggles are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of being human. Our imperfections are not obstacles to awakening. They are the very ground in which awakening grows. When we can meet our own difficulties with the same understanding and kindness that we hope to extend to others, we discover that peace was never something we needed to achieve through force. It was always available, waiting for us to stop fighting and simply allow it to be here. Let your breath flow naturally without trying to control it. Notice how it knows what to do without any instruction from you. This gateway of the tender heart, this understanding of dukkha and compassion transforms everything about how we meet life's difficulties. We stop seeing our struggles as evidence that something is wrong with us. We stop treating pain as an enemy to be defeated. Instead, we begin to understand that our capacity to suffer is also our capacity to love. That our tender hearts, which can be hurt, are also the hearts that can open to all beings with understanding and care. When Kenji looked at the men who had robbed him, He saw their suffering clearly. This seeing naturally gave birth to compassion. When Miki learned to look at her own struggles with gentleness rather than judgment, she found the peace she had been seeking through harsh discipline. Both of them discovered that the tender heart is not weak. It is profoundly strong because it is willing to feel, to understand, to remain open even in the face of difficulty. This is the second gateway, the gateway of the tender heart. It invites us to stop running from suffering and to start meeting it with wise compassion. Not because we want to suffer, but because we understand that pain is part of life and that our response to pain determines whether it becomes a doorway to freedom or a prison of isolation. As you rest here, notice if there is any place where you have been harsh with yourself, any way you have been treating your own struggles with judgment or criticism. Can you soften there? Can you offer yourself the same understanding you would offer to someone you love who was struggling? This compassion, this tenderness toward ourselves and all beings naturally leads to peace. Not because it eliminates difficulty, but because it changes our relationship to difficulty. When we stop fighting our own hearts, when we stop demanding that life be free of pain, we discover a spaciousness that can hold everything: joy and sorrow, success and failure, strength and vulnerability. All of it held in the compassionate awareness that says, yes, this too. This is also part of being alive. Let yourself rest in this understanding. The tender heart is the wise heart. The compassionate heart is the peaceful heart. And this peace is not something far away or difficult to achieve. It is here, in this moment, in the gentleness with which you can meet whatever arises, in the understanding that all beings struggle and that this shared vulnerability is what connects us to one another in the deepest way. Breathe. Rest. Allow the teaching to settle into you like rain soaking into thirsty earth. The gateway of the tender heart is open. All that is required is the willingness to walk through it with kindness. The third basic truth that the Buddha taught is perhaps the most subtle and the most freeing. In the ancient language, it is called anatta. This word is often translated as no self or emptiness, but these translations can sound confusing or even frightening. What does it mean to have no self? Are we being asked to disappear? But anatta points to something gentler and more liberating than these words suggest. It means that we are not as separate as we think we are, that the boundaries we draw between ourselves and the world are not as solid as they appear, that the fixed identity we cling to, the story we tell about who we are, is not the deepest truth of our being. When we truly see this, when we recognize that we are not isolated islands but part of the vast flowing river of life, something relaxes inside us. The burden of having to be somebody, of having to maintain a particular identity, begins to lift. We discover a spaciousness, a freedom that comes from no longer being trapped in narrow definitions of who we think we must be. The Zen masters teach that much of our suffering comes from defending and maintaining a sense of separate self. We spend enormous energy trying to be somebody special, trying to prove our worth, trying to live up to the stories we believe about ourselves. But what if the peace we seek lies not in becoming someone better, but in recognizing the freedom that exists beyond all these identities? Let us explore a story that shows how releasing our grip on limited self-definitions can open us to a much larger truth. In the mountains above a small village, there lived a woodcutter named Daichi who had spent his entire life among the trees. Every morning for 40 years, he would climb the steep forest paths with his axe, select the right trees for cutting, and spend the day splitting wood. Every evening he would return home, tired and satisfied with his simple work. Daichi thought of himself in very simple terms. When people asked what he did, he would say, "I cut wood. That is all I know." He was not educated like the village scholars who could read ancient texts. He was not wealthy like the merchants who traveled to distant cities. He was not skilled in arts or crafts like the makers of pottery and cloth. He was just a woodcutter, nothing more. One day, while working deep in the forest, Daichi heard voices calling out. Following the sounds, he discovered a group of monks who had become lost while traveling between monasteries. There were 15 of them, sitting by a small stream, looking worried and uncertain about which direction to go. Their leader, an elderly abbot, approached Daichi with relief visible on his face. "Excuse me, friend," the abbot said respectfully. "We have been walking for 2 days and cannot find our way back to the main path. Do you know these mountains well?" Daichi nodded. "I have been walking these paths since I was a boy. I know every tree and stream." The abbot's face brightened. "Could you possibly guide us back to the road that leads to Zenzen Temple? We would be deeply grateful for your help." Daichi agreed immediately, though it meant leaving his work for the day. He led the group through what seemed to them like unmarked wilderness, but to him were familiar paths as clear as the roads through the village. As they walked, the monks marveled at his knowledge. "How do you know this path leads to the main road?" One monk asked as Daichi guided them through dense forest where no trail was visible. "I can tell by the way the moss grows on the trees," Daichi explained. "The moss is thicker on the north side. I know the road runs east to west through this valley. Also, if you listen carefully, you can hear the river that runs beside the road." The monks listened, but could hear only forest sounds. Yet, as they continued following Daichi, they soon came to the river and shortly after, to the road. As they walked, Daichi continued to share what he knew. He pointed out which plants could be eaten safely, which ones could be used to treat small injuries, where the best water could be found, how to read the weather in the clouds and wind. All of this he knew simply from paying attention during his years in the forest. "You have such deep knowledge of living in harmony with nature," a young monk said with admiration. "Have you studied these things in books?" Daichi laughed. "I cannot read books. I just pay attention to what the forest teaches me every day. When you spend enough time with the trees and streams, they show you what you need to know." When they reached the road that would lead them safely to their destination, the abbot took Daichi's weathered hands in his own. "My friend, you have saved us from a very difficult situation. How can we repay your kindness?" "No payment is needed," Daichi said simply. "I was glad to help." But the abbot was not finished. He looked at Daichi with eyes that seemed to see something the woodcutter himself had never noticed. "You say you are just a woodcutter," the abbot said gently. "But today you have been our teacher. You showed us wisdom about the natural world that none of our books contain. You demonstrated compassion by helping strangers without expecting anything in return. You shared your knowledge freely and guided us with great patience." The old monk paused, still holding Daichi's hands. "Tell me, what makes someone a teacher? Is it having read many books, or is it having learned from life and sharing that learning with others who need it?" Daichi was quiet for a long moment. I suppose it is about sharing what you know to help others. And what makes someone wise? The abbot continued. Is it knowing complicated theories, or is it understanding how to live well and peacefully with the world? Again, Daichi thought carefully. Perhaps wisdom is knowing how to work with life instead of fighting against it. The abbot smiled warmly. Then you are both a teacher and a wise man, whether you call yourself these things or not. You have taught us more in one afternoon than we learned in many days of formal study. Thank you for showing us that wisdom lives not just in monasteries and books, but in the hearts of those who pay attention to life. As the monks continued on their journey, Daichi walked slowly back into the forest. He felt something shifting inside him. For 40 years, he had seen himself as just a woodcutter, as if this was something small or unimportant. But the monks had seen him differently. They had recognized him as a teacher, a guide, a wise man. Which view was correct? The question turned over in his mind as he returned to his work. That night, sitting by his fire after his simple dinner, Daichi reflected on what the abbot had said. He realized that he had been limiting himself with his own narrow idea of who he was. He had thought that being a woodcutter was somehow less valuable than being a scholar or a monk. But the abbot had helped him see that his knowledge and his natural kindness were also forms of wisdom. Over the following weeks, Daichi began to notice things about himself he had never recognized before. When neighbors came to him for advice about practical problems, he realized he was teaching. When he helped lost travelers find their way, he was demonstrating the compassion the abbot had spoken of. When he worked in rhythm with the seasons and weather, reading the signs in nature, he was living a kind of meditation. Nothing about his daily activities had changed. He still cut wood. He still walked the mountain paths. But his understanding of who he was had expanded completely. He was still a woodcutter, but he was also much more than that. He was a teacher, a guide, a keeper of forest wisdom, a helper to those in need. Years later, when people would ask Daichi about who he would smile and say something surprising. I used to think I was just a woodcutter. Then I learned I was also a teacher and a wise man. But eventually I understood that all these labels are like clothes I wear. Underneath them, I am simply someone who pays attention to life and tries to be helpful. That seems to be enough. This story shows us something beautiful about the teaching of anatta. Daichi had trapped himself in a very small idea of who he was. Just a woodcutter. He had created a boundary around his identity that made him feel limited and unimportant. But this boundary was not real. It was just a story he had been telling himself. When the abbot helped him see beyond this narrow definition, Daichi discovered that he was much more than the label he had accepted. His kindness, his wisdom, his knowledge, his willingness to help, all of these qualities had been there all along. They were just hidden behind the story. I am just a woodcutter, nothing more. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about no self. We are not the narrow stories we tell about ourselves. We are not limited by the identities we cling to. The boundaries we draw, saying, this is who I am and this is who I am not, these boundaries are not solid truths. They are fluid, changeable, much more open than we realize. Daichi's transformation did not require him to change his work or learn new skills. It required him to see beyond the limiting label he had placed on himself. When he stopped defining himself as just anything, he could recognize the fuller truth of his being. This teaching is important because many of us suffer from narrow ideas about who we are. We think we are just a parent, just a worker, just someone ordinary. We compare ourselves to others and find ourselves lacking. We believe we need to become someone different, someone better, before we can be worthy of respect or peace. But the Zen teaching of Anatta tells us something different. It says that beneath all these labels and identities is something much more spacious. A natural awareness, a basic goodness, a capacity for wisdom and compassion that is not dependent on any particular role or achievement. When we stop defending narrow definitions of ourselves, we discover a freedom we did not know was possible. Notice the space around you, the air that holds the sounds, that carries the light. Can you sense how you are held by something larger than your idea of yourself? Let us explore another story that takes this teaching even deeper, showing us what lies beneath all our ideas about who we are. There was once a monastery that took in orphaned children and raised them as part of the community. One of these children was a boy named Kodo, who had been found as an infant with no knowledge of his family or origins. The monks raised him with kindness and care, but Kodo always felt different from the others. Unlike the monks who had chosen their spiritual path, Kodo felt like he belonged nowhere in particular. He was not officially a monk, since he had never taken vows. But he was not a regular villager either, since he had been raised in the monastery. He helped with daily tasks and participated in temple life, but he often felt like he was simply existing without any real purpose. As Kodo grew into a young man, this feeling of not belonging grew stronger. He would watch the monks during their ceremonies and feel like an outsider looking in. He would see village families during festivals and feel envious of their clear connections to each other. He began to think of himself as nobody special, just someone who happened to end up at the monastery by chance. One day, a renowned master from the capital came to visit the temple. Master Sogen was known throughout the region for his wisdom and his ability to see the true nature of anyone he met. The monks were honored to receive such a guest, and they prepared their finest ceremonies to welcome him. During his stay, Master Sogen met privately with each monk to offer personal guidance. Kodo assumed he would not be included in these meetings since he was not officially a monk. But to his surprise, he was called to see the master just like everyone else. Kodo approached the meeting with nervousness, unsure what to say to such an important teacher. He entered the simple room where Master Sogen sat and bowed respectfully. "Please, sit," the master said with a warm voice. "Tell me about yourself." "There is not much to tell, Master," Kodo said quietly. "I am not really anybody special. I was left here as a baby. The monks have been kind enough to let me stay, and I help with daily work. But I do not have any particular skills or purpose. I am just here." Master Sogen listened carefully, his eyes gentle and attentive. When Kodo finished, the master asked a simple question. "Who told you that you are nobody special?" Kodo was surprised. "Well, nobody told me directly. I just know it is true. I have no family, no name, no achievements. I have not taken vows or done anything important. I am just an orphan who lives at a monastery." "I see," Master Sogen said softly. "And who decided that having a family name makes someone special? Who determined that taking vows or achieving things gives a person value?" Kodo had never thought about these questions before. "I suppose I just assumed these things mattered." Master Sogen smiled. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone who has been shaped by spiritual practice since infancy. I see someone who has learned to live simply and help others without expecting recognition. I see someone who has grown up surrounded by wisdom and compassion and has absorbed these qualities naturally, like a plant absorbing sunlight. The master leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming even gentler. Most people come to spiritual practice later in life, after their minds have been filled with worldly concerns and confused ideas. You have been practicing from the beginning, even if you did not know that is what you were doing. Your ordinary daily life has been a form of meditation. Your simple helping has been a form of service. You have been walking the path all along. Kodo felt confused. But I have never achieved enlightenment or had profound realizations like the stories about great masters. I have never felt special or different. And how do you know what enlightenment looks like? Master Sojin asked gently. What do you think it should feel like? Do you imagine it comes with lightning and visions and a sense of being extraordinary? I thought it would feel different somehow. I thought enlightened people would feel important and special. Master Sojin laughed, but it was a kind laugh, full of warmth. My friend, you have been looking for enlightenment as if it was something that would make you feel superior to others, something that would prove you are special. But what if wisdom is exactly the opposite? What if peace comes from recognizing that you do not need to be special at all? That you are already complete exactly as you are? He gestured toward the window where other monks could be seen going about their daily tasks. Look at your brothers out there. They are sweeping, cooking, tending the garden. Are they any less awake when they are doing these simple tasks than when they are sitting in meditation? Is their true nature only present during formal practice, or is it always here, in every moment, in every activity? Kodo watched the familiar scene with new eyes. He began to understand what the master was pointing toward. The Buddha nature you have been seeking, Master Sojin continued, is not hidden inside you waiting to be discovered through special achievements. It is what has been looking through your eyes your entire life. It is what has been present during every moment of simple kindness, every act of helping, every instant of attention to your daily work. Master Sojin stood and placed a gentle hand on Kodo's shoulder. You came here telling me you are nobody special. And in one way you are absolutely right. You are not special in the way the small self wants to be special. You are not important in the way the mind wants to be important. But this ordinariness that you are disappointed by is actually your greatest gift. You have lived your whole life without the burden of trying to become someone impressive. And because of that, you have remained naturally yourself. That evening, as Kodo went about his usual tasks of helping with dinner and cleaning up, everything felt both exactly the same and completely different. He was still doing the same simple work, still living the same quiet life. But he was no longer waiting for something else to happen. He was no longer looking for a different identity or a special achievement to make him feel valuable. He realized that the seeking itself had been the only thing preventing him from recognizing what was already here. His true nature had been present all along, not hidden, but so obvious that he had overlooked it while searching for something more impressive. The story of Kodo reveals the deepest aspect of the teaching of no self. We often think we need to become someone special, achieve something important, or have dramatic spiritual experiences to be complete. But the truth is the opposite. Our true nature is already here, not as something extraordinary, but as the ordinary awareness that experiences life moment by moment. Kodo's struggle was not that he lacked something. It was that he had convinced himself he was lacking. He had created an identity based on not having a family name, not having taken vows, not having achieved anything notable. This negative identity was as much a prison as a positive one would have been. Either way, he was trapped in stories about who he was or was not. Master Sojin helped him see that all these stories, positive or negative, are just stories. They are not the truth of what we are. Beneath the orphan, beneath the helper, beneath all the labels and roles, there is simply awareness itself, simply being. And this being is already complete, already whole, already at peace. This is perhaps the most liberating teaching in all of Buddhism. We do not need to earn our worth through accomplishments. We do not need to prove we are special through achievements. We do not need to become someone different before we can rest in peace. The awareness that is reading these words right now, the consciousness that experiences thoughts and feelings, is already complete just as it is. When we truly understand this, a great burden lifts. We can stop defending our identity, stop proving our worth, stop trying so hard to be somebody. We can simply be what we are, which is much more spacious and free than any identity we could construct. This teaching of anatta, of no separate self, does not mean we disappear or become nothing. It means we recognize that we are not trapped in the narrow boxes we have built around ourselves. We are not limited by our past, our family background, our achievements or lack of them. All of these things are part of our story, but they are not the essence of what we are. What we truly are is more like the space that holds everything. Like the sky that allows all weather to pass through it without being damaged or diminished. Our true nature is not in any particular cloud or storm, but in the vast openness that remains unchanged regardless of what appears within it. Both Daichi and Kodo discovered this in their own ways. Daichi learned that he was not limited to being just a woodcutter. Kodo learned that he did not need to be anybody special. Both teachings point to the same truth. We are not the narrow identities we cling to. We are something much more open, much more free, much more spacious than any label can capture. This understanding naturally brings peace because it removes the burden of having to maintain a particular self-image. When we are not defending an identity, not trying to prove something, not struggling to become someone different, we can finally rest. We can meet life as it comes without feeling like we must fit it into our story of who we are. Let yourself rest in this understanding now. You do not need to be anybody particular. You do not need to have achieved anything special. The simple fact of your awareness, of your capacity to be present, of your willingness to listen and learn, this is enough. This has always been enough. The gateway of no separation is not about losing yourself. It is about finding your true self beneath all the false identities you have carried. It is about discovering that you are not an isolated island, but part of the vast ocean of being. And in this recognition, there is a peace that does not depend on maintaining any particular story about who you are. Breathe. Rest. Allow these words to point beyond themselves to the living truth they are trying to indicate. You are not your story. You are not your achievements or failures. You are not your labels or roles. You are the awareness that witnesses all of these things. And that awareness is already free, already complete, already at peace. This is the third gateway. The gateway of recognizing that the boundaries we draw around ourselves are not as solid as they seem. that we are much more than our limited ideas about who we are, and that in this spaciousness, in this freedom from narrow self-definition, there is a natural ease and peace that was here all along, simply waiting to be recognized. There is a simple practice that runs through all of Zen Buddhism like a golden thread. It is the practice of being fully present for this moment, exactly as it is. In the teachings, this is often called mindfulness, but that word can sound formal or complicated. What it really means is paying attention, being here. Not lost in thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow, but actually experiencing what is happening right now. This might sound easy, but if you watch your mind for even a few moments, you will notice something surprising. The mind is almost never fully here. It is planning the future, replaying the past, judging the present, wandering in daydreams. Our bodies are in one place, but our attention is somewhere else entirely. The Zen masters discovered something remarkable about this divided attention. They found that most of our suffering comes not from what is actually happening, but from our thoughts about what is happening. The actual experience of this moment is usually workable, often even pleasant. But our thoughts about how things should be different, about what might happen next, about what already happened, these thoughts create layers of stress and struggle on top of simple reality. When we learn to be fully present, even for brief moments, something shifts. The racing mind settles like dust settling in still water. The body relaxes, and we discover that this moment, met with full attention, contains a completeness we had been missing while we were lost in thought. Let us explore a story that shows how learning to be truly present can transform even the simplest activities into sources of deep peace. In a distant province, there lived a tea merchant named Taro who traveled from village to village selling fine teas from mountain gardens. His cart was filled with carefully wrapped packages of green tea, black tea, and rare flowering teas that bloomed like small miracles when steeped in hot water. Taro took great pride in his knowledge of tea and his ability to match each customer with the perfect blend for their taste. But Taro had a problem that troubled him deeply. His mind was always somewhere else. While walking through one village, he would be thinking about the next village he needed to reach. While talking with customers about tea, he would be calculating profits or worrying about tomorrow's weather. While eating his evening meal, he would be planning the next day's route or replaying conversations from earlier. This constant mental activity made Taro feel exhausted and scattered. He would often arrive in a new village and realize he could not remember anything about the journey there. He would finish conversations with customers and immediately forget their names or what they had purchased. His life felt like a blur of constant motion without any real satisfaction. One evening, Taro arrived in a mountain village just as the sun was setting. He was tired from a long day of travel and eager to find lodging for the night. As he walked through the quiet streets pulling his cart, he noticed a small tea house with warm light glowing from its windows. Inside, an elderly woman sat alone at a low table, slowly preparing tea with careful, unhurried movements. Something about her presence caught Taro's attention. She seemed completely absorbed in what she was doing, as if nothing else in the world existed except this tea ceremony unfolding before her. Taro knocked gently and asked if he might shelter there for the night. The woman, whose name was Sachiko, welcomed him warmly and invited him to sit while she finished preparing the tea. "I am a tea merchant," Taro said, settling his tired body onto a cushion. "I have teas from all over the region. Perhaps you would like to try some of my finest varieties?" Sachiko smiled gently and continued her slow, meditative movements. "Thank you for your generous offer," she said. "But first, would you join me in drinking this tea I have already prepared? It is just simple green tea, nothing special." Taro agreed, though he was curious to show off his premium selections. Sachiko poured the tea into small, humble clay cups and placed one before Taro. Then she lifted her own cup with both hands and took a slow, appreciative sip. Taro lifted his cup and took a quick drink, ready to comment on the quality and suggest improvements. But before he could speak, Sachiko asked quietly, "What did you taste?" The question surprised Taro. "Well, it is green tea. Decent quality, though I have much better varieties in my cart. The leaves could be picked earlier in the season for a more delicate flavor, and the water temperature might have been." "No," Sachiko interrupted gently. "I did not ask you to analyze or compare. I asked what you tasted. Right now, in your mouth, what do you actually taste?" Taro paused, confused. He lifted the cup again and took another sip, this time trying to focus on the actual sensations. But his mind immediately began its familiar pattern of comparison and evaluation, thinking about other teas he had tasted, judging this one against his mental standards. "Try once more," Sachiko suggested. "But this time, drink as if you have never tasted tea before. As if this is the first sip of tea in your entire life." Taro found this instruction strange, but something in the woman's peaceful presence made him want to try. He lifted the cup very slowly and took the smallest possible sip. Instead of thinking about the tea, he tried to simply experience it. For the first time, he noticed the warmth spreading across his tongue. He felt the subtle bitterness that made his mouth feel slightly dry. He detected a hint of sweetness that appeared after the initial taste faded. There was an earthy quality that reminded him of morning mist over mountain forests. "Now what did you taste?" Sachiko asked. "I actually tasted the tea," Taro said, surprised by his own response. "Not my thoughts about the tea, but the tea itself." Sachiko nodded with approval. Most people spend their whole lives drinking tea without ever really tasting it. They are so busy thinking about the tea, comparing it to other teas, judging whether they like it or not, that they miss the direct experience of drinking. She poured him another cup. "Try again. This time, also notice what it feels like to hold the warm cup in your hands. Notice the sensation of swallowing. Pay attention to the steam rising from the surface." Taro spent the next hour drinking tea with a level of attention he had never experienced before. Each sip became a small meditation. He noticed how his breathing naturally slowed when he focused completely on what was happening. His racing thoughts settled into quiet appreciation for this simple activity. "This is how I learned to find peace," Sachiko told him as the evening grew late. "Not by changing my circumstances, but by showing up fully for whatever was already here. I have been making tea in this same simple way for 30 years, and I discover something new every single time because I am truly present for the experience." That night, Taro slept more deeply than he had in months. The next morning, as he prepared to continue his journey, he found that everything felt different. As he loaded his cart, he noticed the weight and texture of each package. As he walked through the village, he heard birds singing that he had never noticed before. The morning air felt fresh and alive against his skin. From that day forward, Taro's approach to his work completely changed. Instead of rushing through his days with his mind elsewhere, he began to practice what Sachiko had shown him. When talking with customers, he listened fully to their words instead of planning his next sales pitch. When walking from village to village, he noticed the changing landscape, the feel of his feet on the path, the rhythm of his breathing. This simple shift in attention transformed not only Tero's experience of his work, but also his success as a merchant. Customers began seeking him out because they felt truly heard and understood when they talked with him. His genuine presence made people trust him, and his careful attention helped him match each person with exactly the right tea for their needs. Years later, when people asked Taro about the secret to his peaceful contentment, he would say simply, "I learned that happiness is not something you find by looking elsewhere. It is something you discover by being completely where you are." This story shows us something essential about the practice of presence. Taro was a tea merchant, someone whose entire life revolved around tea. Yet, he had never truly tasted tea. He had spent years thinking about tea, analyzing it, comparing different varieties, but he had never been fully present for the simple experience of drinking it. This is how most of us live. We are so busy thinking about our experiences that we miss the experiences themselves. We eat without tasting, walk without seeing, listen without hearing. Our attention is divided, scattered across past and future, rarely gathered completely into this present moment. When Sachiko asked Taro to simply taste the tea without analyzing or comparing, she was inviting him into a different way of being. A way of meeting life directly, through full attention, rather than through the filter of constant thinking. And in that simple shift, Taro discovered something he had been missing his entire life: the richness of actual experience. The teaching of mindfulness is not complicated. It is simply the practice of being here. When you eat, actually taste the food. When you walk, feel your feet touching the ground. When you listen to someone, hear their words without planning your response. This complete attention naturally brings peace because it stops the mental restlessness that keeps us feeling scattered and unsatisfied. Taro discovered that the same activity he had done thousands of times before, drinking tea, could become a source of deep satisfaction when he brought his full attention to it. This shows us that we do not need to change our circumstances to find peace. We need to change the quality of attention we bring to our circumstances. Notice the weight of your body right now. Feel how you are supported without any effort on your part. This support is always here, but we often miss it because our attention is elsewhere. The practice of presence transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for rest and renewal. When we eat with full attention, each meal becomes nourishing for both body and spirit. When we listen with complete presence, our relationships become deeper and more meaningful. When we bring mindful attention to any activity, it becomes a form of meditation that settles the mind naturally. Let us explore another story that shows how this practice of presence can sustain us even during life's most difficult moments. There was once a Zen master named Josen who was known throughout the region for his ability to remain calm and centered no matter what was happening around him. Students would come from distant temples to learn from him, hoping to discover the secret of his peaceful presence. But his most devoted student, a young monk named Kaku, was beginning to have doubts. Kaku had been living at the temple for 2 years, and while he found Master Josen to be wise and kind, he had never seen him face any real difficulties. The temple was peaceful, the community was harmonious, and their daily routine was predictable and serene. Kaku wondered if his teacher's calmness was simply the result of living in such ideal conditions. Anyone can be peaceful in a place like this, Kaku confided to his friend one evening. But what would happen if Master Josen faced real problems? Would he still be so calm if his world was turned upside down? One autumn morning, Kaku's question was answered in a way he had not expected. A messenger arrived at the temple with sorrowful news. Bandits had attacked Master Josen's home village during the night. His elderly mother and younger brother, who still lived there, had died in the violence. The family home where Josen had grown up had been burned. Kaku watched his teacher's face carefully as he received this news. For a moment, Josen's eyes filled with tears and his body seemed to sag with the weight of grief. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing or raging against the tragedy, Josen simply sat down on a nearby stone and began to breathe slowly and deeply. "Master," the messenger said urgently, "should you not leave immediately? There may be arrangements to make, ceremonies to plan." Josen nodded gently. "Yes, I will go. But first I need a few moments to be present with this news and what it means." Kaku was amazed. His teacher was facing terrible loss, and yet he was not running around frantically or drowning in despair. Instead, he was sitting quietly, apparently paying careful attention to his own grief and shock. After several minutes of silent breathing, Josen stood up calmly. "Kaku," he said, "please come with me. We will travel to my village together." During the long journey, Kaku expected his teacher to be lost in sorrow or distracted by planning. Instead, he found that Josen was more present and attentive than ever. When they stopped to rest, Josen noticed the changing colors of the autumn leaves. When they encountered other travelers, he listened to their stories with complete attention. When they shared simple meals, he ate with obvious appreciation for the food. "Master," Kaku finally asked, unable to contain his confusion, "how can you notice such small things when something so painful has happened? Should you not be too upset to pay attention to anything else?" Josen stopped walking and looked at his student with eyes that held both deep sadness and profound peace. "Kaku, this is exactly when mindful attention matters most. When we are overwhelmed by difficulty, our first instinct is to escape from the present moment. We get lost in thoughts about what we should have done differently, or we imagine all the ways the future will be affected by this loss." He gestured to the forest path they were walking. But escaping into mental stories about the past or future does not help anyone. My mother and brother are gone, and no amount of mental anguish will bring them back. What I can do is honor their memory by staying fully present for whatever needs my attention right now. Josen picked up a fallen leaf and studied its pattern of veins and colors. "If I spend this journey lost in thoughts of regret or worry, I miss the opportunity to appreciate the beauty they would have wanted me to see. If I am too distracted by grief to listen carefully to the people we meet, I might miss chances to help someone who needs it." He looked directly at Kaku. Mindfulness is not about avoiding difficult emotions or pretending everything is fine. It is about being present for all of life, including the painful parts. When I sit with my grief mindfully, I can feel it completely without being destroyed by it. When I stay present even in sorrow, I remain available to respond wisely to whatever needs my care. When they reached the village, Kaku saw his teacher's wisdom in action. Because Josen was fully present for each conversation and decision, he was able to comfort other grieving families, arrange meaningful ceremonies, and handle practical matters with clarity and compassion. His mindful attention allowed him to be genuinely helpful during a time when many people would have been too overwhelmed to think clearly. That evening, as they sat by the graves of his mother and brother, Josen wept quietly. But even his tears seemed different from ordinary crying. They flowed naturally, without desperate grasping or bitter resentment. He was present for his sorrow without being consumed by it. "Now I understand," Kaku said softly. "You are not peaceful because you do not have problems. You are peaceful because you know how to be present with whatever problems arise." Josen nodded. Mindfulness does not make difficulties disappear, but it prevents us from making our difficulties worse by fighting against them or running away from them. When we can stay present even with pain, we discover that we are much stronger and more resilient than we realized. The story of Master Josen shows us that mindfulness is not a practice only for peaceful times. It is especially valuable during our most challenging moments because it prevents us from adding mental and emotional turmoil to whatever difficulties we are already facing. Josen's response to tragedy demonstrates that being present does not mean being emotionless or detached. He felt his grief fully, but did not get lost in it. He experienced his sorrow without letting it take over his entire being. This is the balance that mindfulness offers, neither suppressing our emotions nor being overwhelmed by them. When we face loss, disappointment, or crisis, our minds often make things worse by spinning stories about how terrible everything is, how unfair life is, or how we will never recover. These mental additions to our actual experience create much more suffering than the original difficulty ever could. Mindful presence offers a different way to meet hardship. Instead of fighting against painful emotions or drowning in them, we can learn to be present with them. When we breathe with our sadness instead of resisting it, when we acknowledge our fear without being controlled by it, we discover that we can handle much more than we thought possible. Young Kaku expected that true peace would mean never facing problems. But Master Josen showed him something deeper. Peace comes not from having an easy life, but from knowing how to be present with life as it actually is. The Master's decades of mindfulness practice had not protected him from loss, but it had given him the capacity to meet loss with grace and wisdom. Notice any sounds around you right now. They arise without asking permission. They fade without needing your approval. Can you simply hear them without judging them as pleasant or unpleasant? This teaching brings enormous relief because it means we do not have to wait for life to become problem-free before we can find peace. We can learn to be at peace even in the midst of challenges by staying present for what is actually happening rather than getting lost in our stories about what is happening. Master Josen noticed the autumn leaves even while grieving because he understood something profound. The beauty of the world does not disappear when we suffer. The kindness of strangers does not vanish when we are in pain. The taste of simple food is still nourishing even when our hearts are breaking. When we stay present, we remain available to receive whatever support and goodness life offers, even in dark times. The young monk learned that his teacher's peace was not fragile or dependent on perfect conditions. It was rooted in a deep practice of presence that could weather any storm. This is the gift that mindfulness offers all of us. Not the elimination of problems, but the discovery that we can meet any problem with awareness and grace. Let your body settle a little more. Release any tension you notice in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Feel what it is like to simply be here, in this moment, without needing anything to be different. The gateway of this moment is always open. It does not require special conditions or perfect circumstances. Right now, regardless of what is happening in your life, you can practice being present. You can feel your breath. You can notice sensations in your body. You can hear sounds around you. You can be here fully for this one moment. And when we string together enough of these moments of presence, something remarkable happens. The racing mind begins to settle. The constant anxiety about past and future starts to fade. We discover that this moment, met with full attention, is actually enough. Not perfect, perhaps. Not free of difficulty, but workable, manageable, even sometimes surprisingly peaceful. Taro learned this through the simple act of truly tasting tea. Master Josen demonstrated it even in the face of profound loss. And you too can discover it right now by bringing your attention fully to whatever is here. The breath moving through your body, the feeling of being supported, the sounds in your environment, the simple fact of being alive and aware in this moment. This is not a complicated teaching. It is perhaps the simplest teaching in all of Zen Buddhism. Be here. Pay attention. Notice what is actually happening rather than what you think should be happening. And in that simple act of presence, discover the peace that has been available all along, hidden beneath the constant thinking mind. The gateway of this moment invites you to step out of the stream of endless thoughts about past and future and to rest in the only time that actually exists. Now, this breath, this sensation, this moment of awareness. Everything else is memory or imagination. But this is real. This is alive. This is where peace lives. Let yourself rest in this understanding. You do not need to be anywhere else or be anyone else. You do not need to solve all your problems or figure out your entire future. You simply need to be here, now, as completely as you can. And in that presence, you will find the peace you have been seeking, not as something you must achieve, but as something that naturally arises when you stop running and finally come home to this moment. There is a teaching in Zen Buddhism that seems paradoxical at first. It says that we must learn to let go, to release our grip on things, to practice non-attachment. When we first hear this, it can sound like we are being asked to stop caring, to become cold or indifferent, to love nothing and need nothing. But this is not what the teaching means at all. Non-attachment does not mean we stop loving. It means we learn to love without strangling what we love with our need to possess it. It means we care deeply while also holding lightly. It means we can appreciate beauty without demanding that it stay forever, enjoy experiences without clinging to them when they pass. The Buddha taught that attachment is one of the deepest sources of suffering. Not love, but attachment. And there is a crucial difference between these two. Love wants what is best for the beloved. Attachment wants to possess, to control, to keep things exactly as they are. Love is open-handed. Attachment is a closed fist. When we cling tightly to anything, whether it is a person, a possession, an experience, or even an idea about how life should be, we create suffering for ourselves. We live in constant fear of loss. We cannot enjoy what we have because we are too busy worrying about losing it. The very thing we thought would bring us happiness becomes a source of anxiety. The Zen masters teach that true freedom comes from learning to hold life lightly, not from having nothing, but from grasping nothing. Not from caring about nothing, but from releasing our desperate need to control everything. When we can appreciate what is here without demanding that it stay, when we can love deeply without needing to possess, we discover a peace that no loss can take away. Let us explore a story that shows how releasing our grip on things can actually allow us to enjoy them more fully. In a coastal village, there lived a fisherman named Ichiro who owned a beautiful boat that had been built by his grandfather's hands. The boat was a work of art, with carved wooden details and a sail that caught the wind perfectly. It was not just Ichiro's livelihood, but his pride and joy. He would spend hours each week polishing its wood and mending its nets, keeping everything in pristine condition. Ichiro was known throughout the village as the most successful fisherman. His nets always seemed to find the richest schools of fish, and his knowledge of the ocean's moods was unmatched. Other fishermen would watch him launch his boat each morning and hope to learn from his methods. But despite his success, Ichiro had become anxious and unhappy. He had grown so attached to his boat and his reputation that fishing was no longer enjoyable. Every morning he would wake up worried about the weather, concerned about whether the fish would be running, fearful that something might damage his precious boat. He would spend the night before each fishing trip checking and rechecking his equipment, unable to sleep for all his planning and worrying. On the water, his attachment to catching fish made him tense. He would become frustrated when other fishermen had good luck in areas where he found nothing. He would cut his trips short if the fishing seemed slow, afraid to waste time, or push himself to exhaustion when the fish were biting, terrified to miss any opportunity. One morning, Ichiro discovered that his boat had been taken during the night. Someone had cut the rope and sailed it away while the village slept. Ichiro stood on the dock, staring at the empty space, feeling as if his whole identity had vanished with the boat. The other fishermen felt sorry for Ichiro and offered to help, but most of their boats were barely large enough for one person. Only old Saburo, whose tiny, weathered fishing boat was held together with patches and repairs, offered to take Ichiro out with him. Ichiro had always looked down on Saburo's poor equipment and modest catches. The old man's boat looked like it might fall apart at any moment, and his nets were so old and mended that they seemed to be made more of patches than original material. But with no other options, Ichiro reluctantly accepted the offer. As they paddled out in Saburo's small boat, Ichiro felt embarrassed and worried. How could he catch fish with such inadequate equipment? What if other fishermen saw him in this pathetic vessel? His reputation would be ruined. But something unexpected happened once they reached the fishing grounds. Without his perfect boat and carefully maintained equipment to worry about, Ichiro found himself paying attention to things he had never noticed before. He watched the way Saburo read the water, not through complicated analysis, but through simple, quiet observation. The old man would sit perfectly still for long minutes, just listening to the rhythm of the waves and feeling the movement of the current. When he cast his patched nets, he did so without any sense of urgency or attachment to the outcome. If the nets came up empty, he would simply try another spot. If they came up full, he would smile quietly and continue his work. "Saburo," Ichiro asked, "are you not worried that your nets might tear? They look like they could fall apart at any moment." The old man chuckled softly. "They might. They have torn many times before, and I have mended them. If they tear today, I will mend them tonight. If they fall apart completely, I will make new ones. The fish do not care how pretty the nets are. As the day progressed, Ichiro found himself relaxing in a way he had not experienced in years. Without his own equipment to maintain and protect, he could simply focus on the experience of fishing itself. He began to remember why he had loved being on the water as a child before fishing became about success and reputation. To his amazement, they caught more fish that day than he had caught in weeks with his sophisticated boat and equipment. But more importantly, he enjoyed the experience in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. "How is this happening?" Ichiro asked Saburo as they hauled in another net full of fish. "Your equipment is so simple and worn, but we are having such success." Saburo smiled as he worked. "Maybe it is because I am not afraid of losing anything. My boat is already old and patched, so I do not worry about scratching it. My nets are already mended, so I do not fear tearing them. When you are not protecting anything, you can focus completely on what you are doing." That evening, as they returned to shore, Ichiro realized that the loss of his boat had freed him from something he had not even known was imprisoning him. His attachment to his perfect equipment had been preventing him from fishing with the natural ease and attention that actually brought success. Over the following weeks, while waiting to see if his stolen boat would be found, Ichiro continued fishing with Saburo. Each day brought new discoveries about how his attachment to having the best equipment had actually been making him a worse fisherman. His constant worry about protecting his possessions had prevented him from being fully present for the work itself. When his boat was eventually recovered and returned to him, Ichiro faced an interesting choice. He could return to his old way of fishing with all its anxiety and attachment, or he could continue with the freedom he had discovered in Saburo's simple approach. He chose to keep his boat, but to fish with a different attitude. He still maintained his equipment carefully, but he no longer lived in fear of losing it. He still worked to catch fish, but he did not let his success or failure determine his peace of mind. He had learned the difference between caring for something and being enslaved by it. Years later, when young fishermen would ask Ichiro for advice, he would tell them something unexpected. "Take good care of your equipment, but do not let your equipment take care of you. Love your work, but do not let your work become your prison. The best fishing happens when you are not afraid of coming home empty-handed." This story shows us something essential about the nature of attachment and freedom. Ichiro loved his boat deeply, but his love had turned into attachment. He no longer simply appreciated the boat. He needed it to be perfect. He needed to protect it constantly. He needed his fishing to always be successful. And all of these needs created a prison of anxiety. When the boat was taken, Ichiro lost what he thought he needed. But he gained something far more valuable. He discovered what it feels like to work without the burden of constant worry, to fish without the weight of needing to succeed, to be on the water without the fear of damaging something precious. Old Saburo showed him what non-attachment looks like in practice. It is not indifference. Saburo clearly cared about his work. He treated his equipment with respect and mended it carefully. But he did not live in fear of losing it. He held his livelihood lightly, and this lightness allowed him to fish with natural grace and presence. The teaching of non-attachment does not ask us to stop caring about things. It asks us to stop making our peace dependent on keeping things exactly as they are. Ichiro could still care for his boat when it was returned, but now he cared for it without being imprisoned by it. He maintained it without living in fear. He fished with dedication without letting outcomes control his well-being. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about letting go. Not abandoning what we love, but releasing our desperate grip on it. When we hold things tightly, we cannot really enjoy them because we are too busy worrying about losing them. But when we hold them lightly, when we appreciate them while they are here without demanding they stay forever, we can actually be present for the beauty and value they offer. Notice any place where you might be holding tension. Your shoulders, your hands, your belly. Can you soften there? Can you practice holding this moment lightly? Ichiro's transformation shows us that what we think we need for happiness often becomes the source of our unhappiness. His perfect boat, instead of bringing joy, had become a source of constant anxiety. His reputation as a skilled fisherman, instead of feeling good, had become a burden he had to defend. Only when these things were taken away did he discover that he could be happy, could be successful, could enjoy his work without them. This does not mean we should not have possessions or take pride in our skills. It means we should not let these things possess us. We can enjoy what we have without being enslaved by the fear of losing it. We can work toward goals without making our peace dependent on achieving them. We can love people without trying to control them or keep them from changing. Let us explore another story that takes this teaching even deeper, showing how letting go can transform not just our relationship with things, but our relationship with our own expectations and plans. There was once a master calligrapher named Eishin, who was renowned throughout the region for his skill. People would travel for days to commission a piece of his work, and his scrolls were treasured by collectors and temples. His brushstrokes seemed to flow from some source of beauty beyond ordinary human ability. Eishin took great pride in his art. He would spend hours preparing his ink to perfect consistency, selecting brushes with ideal flexibility, and waiting for precisely the right mental state before beginning any important piece. His studio was arranged with careful attention, every tool in its proper place, everything organized to support his pursuit of perfection. One spring morning, a wealthy merchant commissioned Eishin to create a scroll for his daughter's wedding. It was to be the most important piece Eishin had ever attempted, worthy of the substantial payment offered. The merchant requested specific characters meaning eternal happiness in Eishin's most elaborate style. Eishin prepared for days. He fasted to purify his mind, meditated to calm his spirit, and practiced the characters hundreds of times on ordinary paper. When he finally felt ready, he laid out his finest silk scroll, prepared his most precious ink, and selected his most beloved brush. As he began the first character, something felt perfect. His hand moved with fluid grace, the ink flowed like water, and the character emerged with stunning beauty. Eishin's heart swelled with satisfaction. This would be his masterpiece, the piece that would establish his legacy for generations. But as he moved to the second character, a sudden gust of wind through the open window knocked over his water bowl. The water splashed across the scroll, creating a large stain right through the center of his perfect first character. Eishin stared at the damaged scroll. Weeks of preparation destroyed in an instant. The silk was expensive and rare. The commission was crucial for his reputation. And worst of all, the perfect character he had created was now completely ruined. His first impulse was to rage at the wind, at his carelessness in leaving the window open, at the terrible timing. He could try to clean the scroll, but the damage was permanent. He could start over, but he had no more silk of this quality, and the merchant expected the piece within days. As Eishin sat staring at the damaged scroll, feeling his dreams of the perfect masterpiece crumble, something began to shift in his perception. He looked more closely at the water stain. It had created an organic, flowing shape that seemed to complement the partial character rather than destroy it. The stain had its own beauty, like a cloud formation or a mountain silhouette. Instead of throwing the scroll away in frustration, Aishin picked up his brush again. He began to work with the accident rather than against it. He incorporated the water stain into his design, using it as the foundation for an entirely different kind of composition. Where he had planned formal perfection, he now created something spontaneous and alive. The characters he painted around and through the stain had a freedom and energy unlike anything he had ever produced. Instead of trying to control every brushstroke, he let his hand respond to what was already on the silk. The accident became a partner in creation rather than an enemy of it. When Aishin finished, he had created something far more beautiful than his original plan. The piece had life and movement that his careful, controlled work had never achieved. The water stain, which had seemed like complete disaster, had freed him from his perfectionism and allowed his true artistic spirit to emerge. The merchant was amazed when he saw the finished work. "Master Aishin," he said, "I have seen many examples of your art, but this is beyond anything you have created before. How did you achieve such natural beauty?" Aishin smiled, remembering his initial horror at the accident. "I stopped trying to create perfection and started allowing perfection to create itself. The stain taught me that my greatest obstacle was not imperfection, but my fear of it. When I let go of needing to control every detail, my art became truly alive." From that day forward, Aishin's work changed completely. He still practiced diligently and prepared carefully, but he no longer tried to force predetermined outcomes. He learned to welcome accidents, to work with the unexpected, and to see imperfection as a doorway to deeper creativity. The story of Aishin shows us another dimension of letting go. His attachment was not to a physical object, but to an idea of how things should be. He had a perfect image in his mind of what his masterpiece would look like, and he was determined to make reality match that image. When the water spilled and destroyed his plan, he had a choice. He could have remained attached to his original vision, seeing the accident as pure disaster. He could have tried to fight against what had happened, wasting energy on anger and regret. But instead, he chose to let go. He released his grip on how things should be and opened himself to how things actually were. This letting go did not mean giving up or becoming careless. It meant working skillfully with what actually appeared rather than fighting against reality in favor of his expectations. And in that release, in that willingness to collaborate with accident rather than control everything, he created something more beautiful than his carefully controlled plan could have produced. This teaching reaches into every corner of our lives. How often do we suffer because reality does not match our expectations? How often do we miss opportunities for joy because we are too focused on how things should be to notice how they actually are? How much energy do we waste trying to force outcomes instead of responding creatively to what actually happens? The Buddhist path teaches us that our greatest suffering comes from fighting reality. Not from reality itself, but from our insistence that it should be different. When Aishin stopped battling the water stain and started working with it, he discovered possibilities he never could have imagined. When we stop demanding that life match our plans and start engaging creatively with what actually shows up, we find a freedom and aliveness that no amount of control could provide. Let your jaw relax. Let your tongue rest softly in your mouth. Feel what it is like to release the constant effort of trying to make everything just right. This is why letting go is so central to finding deep peace. It is not about giving up on life or becoming passive. It is about recognizing that our tight grip on how things should be often prevents us from seeing how beautiful they already are. It is about trusting that life knows something about unfolding that our worried minds cannot grasp. Both Ichiro and Isshin discovered this truth. The fisherman learned that his attachment to his perfect boat was preventing him from fishing with natural ease. The calligrapher learned that his attachment to perfection was preventing him from creating truly perfect art. Both found freedom not by getting what they wanted, but by releasing their desperate need to control outcomes. The peace that comes from this understanding is profound because it does not depend on circumstances being a certain way. Whether the boat is stolen or safe, whether the water spills or not, we can find our way to contentment by working skillfully with whatever appears. We can love our boats and care for our art while also remaining free from the anxiety that comes with clinging. Notice the sounds around you. They come and go without your permission. Can you let them be without trying to hold on to the pleasant ones or push away the unpleasant ones? This gateway of release invites us into a different way of being in the world. Not indifferent, but engaged without attachment. Not careless, but caring without clinging. Not passive, but active in a way that flows with life rather than fighting against it. When we learn to hold life lightly, something remarkable happens. The things we love do not become less precious. They become more precious because we can actually appreciate them fully while they are here. The experiences we enjoy do not become less meaningful. They become more meaningful because we are not wasting our enjoyment worrying about when they will end. Old Saburo fishing in his patched boat, not worried about tearing his nets. Master Isshin working with the water stain instead of against it. Both show us what it looks like to engage fully with life while remaining free from the anxiety of control. Both teach us that the deepest satisfaction comes not from having everything go according to our plans, but from meeting whatever happens with wisdom and grace. As you rest here now, feel into this teaching about letting go. Notice any places in your life where you might be gripping too tightly, where your fear of loss or imperfection might be creating unnecessary suffering. What would it feel like to soften that grip just a little? This is not about becoming careless with what you love. It is about loving without strangling, caring without controlling, engaging without demanding. When we can hold what we value with open hands rather than closed fists, we discover that we have not lost anything. We have gained the freedom to truly enjoy what we have without the constant fear of losing it. The gateway of release stands open, inviting you to step through, not into a life of having nothing, but into a life of grasping nothing. Not into a life of caring about nothing, but into a life of holding everything lightly. In this balance between engagement and release, between loving and letting go, we find the peace that the Buddha promised. The peace that does not depend on circumstances, but on our relationship to circumstances. The peace that remains steady whether we gain or lose, succeed or fail, because it is rooted in something deeper than outcomes. Let yourself rest in this understanding. The breath flows in and out without grasping. The heart beats without clinging. Life unfolds moment by moment, and we can participate fully in that unfolding without needing to control where it goes. This is the freedom that comes from letting go. This is the peace that arises when we finally release our desperate grip and discover that we can trust life to carry us, just as the ocean carries the skilled fisherman who has learned to work with the waves rather than fight against them. There is something the Zen masters have noticed about wisdom. They have observed that we can know many things about truth without actually knowing truth itself. We can read hundreds of books about peace without experiencing a moment of real peace. We can memorize all the teachings about compassion without feeling genuine compassion in our hearts. This is not because books and teachings are worthless. They point us in the right direction. They describe the path. But describing a path is not the same as walking it. Reading about water does not quench thirst. Studying recipes does not fill an empty stomach. And learning about enlightenment, no matter how thoroughly, does not bring the actual experience of awakening. The Buddha himself taught this. He said his teachings were like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is helpful because it shows us where to look. But if we spend all our time studying the finger, analyzing it, discussing its shape and angle, we will miss the moon entirely. The purpose of the finger is to direct our attention to something beyond itself. This teaching is especially important in our modern world, where we have access to more spiritual information than any previous generation. We can read thousands of books about Zen Buddhism. We can listen to countless talks. We can study with many teachers. But none of this accumulation of knowledge will bring us the peace we seek unless we move from knowing about to actually knowing. From understanding concepts to living truth. The Zen masters teach that wisdom must be embodied, not just understood. It must be lived, not just studied. The peace we seek comes not from filling our minds with information, but from transforming how we actually meet each moment of our lives. Let us explore a story that shows the difference between these two kinds of knowing. High in the mountains, there lived a scholar named Hayato who had devoted his entire life to studying Buddhist philosophy. His small house was filled from floor to ceiling with ancient texts, commentaries, and volumes of teachings from every school of Buddhist thought. He could recite complex philosophical arguments from memory and explain the most subtle points of doctrine with impressive precision. Hayato spent his days reading, taking careful notes, and writing his own commentaries on the great works. He had developed a reputation as one of the most learned Buddhist scholars in the region. Students would occasionally make the difficult journey up the mountain to study with him, hoping to benefit from his vast knowledge. But despite all his learning, Hayato felt something was missing. His understanding was complete in theory, but when he faced daily problems or difficult emotions, his scholarly knowledge seemed to offer little help. He could explain the nature of suffering in elaborate detail, but he still suffered. He could describe the path to enlightenment perfectly, but he felt far from enlightened. One winter morning, an old woman appeared at Hayato's door. She was bent with age, dressed in simple peasant clothes and carrying a small bundle of vegetables. She looked like any ordinary village farmer, certainly not someone who would have anything to teach a great scholar. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a humble voice. "I have been walking all night through the snow and I am very cold and tired. Might I sit by your fire for a while to warm myself?" Hayato was annoyed by the interruption to his studies, but his Buddhist training had taught him about compassion. He reluctantly allowed the woman to enter and sit by his small hearth. As she warmed herself, the old woman noticed the books covering every surface of the room. "My," she said with apparent amazement, "you must be very wise to have read so many books about Buddhism." Hayato felt a surge of pride. "Yes," he said, "I have have studied Buddhist philosophy for over 30 years. I know the teachings of all the great masters. There is probably no question about Buddhist doctrine that I cannot answer." The old woman looked impressed. "How wonderful," she said. "I am just a simple farmer, but I've always wondered about something. Perhaps you could help me understand?" "Of course," Hayato said, pleased to have an opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge to someone who would surely be amazed by his wisdom. The woman was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then she asked simply, "What is Buddha?" Hayato launched into an elaborate explanation. He spoke about the historical Buddha, about Buddha nature, about the different aspects of Buddha in various philosophical systems. He quoted ancient texts and cited famous masters. He covered every dimension of Buddhahood that his scholarly training had taught him. He spoke for nearly an hour. When he finished, he looked at the old woman expectantly, waiting for her to express amazement at his learning. But she simply looked confused. "I am sorry," she said apologetically, "but I still do not understand. You have told me many things about Buddha, but you have not told me what Buddha is." Hayato felt a flash of irritation. "I just explained it in great detail. Perhaps you were not listening carefully enough. Buddha is the awakened one, the one who achieved complete enlightenment, the teacher who showed us the path." "Yes, yes," the old woman interrupted gently, "but what is Buddha?" "Not what Buddha did or what Buddha teaches, but what Buddha actually is." Hayato tried again, this time using different terminology and approaching the question from various philosophical angles. But no matter how he explained it, the woman kept asking the same simple question. "But what is Buddha?" After 2 hours of increasingly frustrated explanations, Hayato finally lost his patience. "Look, old woman, if you cannot understand such basic Buddhist concepts, perhaps you should stick to farming and leave philosophy to those who are capable of grasping it." The elderly woman looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much deeper than before. "My dear scholar," she said softly, "you have spent 30 years learning about Buddha, but you have never met Buddha. You can describe Buddha perfectly, but you do not know what Buddha is." She stood up slowly and gathered her small bundle. True understanding is not found in books or explanations. It is found in direct experience. You know what Buddha did and what Buddha taught, but you do not know what Buddha is because you have never looked inside yourself to find the Buddha nature that lives there. As she walked toward the door, she turned back with a gentle smile. "I'm just a simple farmer, as you said. I cannot read your books or explain your philosophies. But when I work in my garden, I know Buddha. When I sit quietly in the evening, I meet Buddha. When I help a neighbor or feed a hungry animal, Buddha is there. I may not know about Buddha, but I know Buddha directly." With that, the old woman disappeared into the snowy morning, leaving Hayato alone with his thousands of books and his suddenly hollow-feeling knowledge. For days afterward, Hayato could not concentrate on his studies. The woman's simple question kept echoing in his mind. What is Buddha? He realized that despite all his learning, he truly could not answer this most basic question from his own direct experience. He knew what others had said about Buddha, but he had never encountered Buddha himself. This meeting changed everything for Hayato. He did not abandon his books entirely, but he began to balance his scholarly study with simple practice. He started paying attention to his daily activities, looking for Buddha in ordinary moments rather than just in philosophical texts. Gradually, Hayato's understanding transformed from something he carried in his head to something he experienced in his heart. His knowledge became wisdom not because he learned new information, but because he began to live what he had always known intellectually. Take a gentle breath. Notice the difference between thinking about breathing and actually feeling the breath move through you. This story shows us something essential about the path to peace. Hayato had accumulated vast knowledge about Buddhism. He could explain every teaching, quote every text, answer every philosophical question. But all this knowledge remained abstract, separate from his actual life. It was information in his head, not wisdom in his heart. The old woman, with her simple question, revealed what was missing. She kept asking, "What is Buddha?" Not, "What do the texts say about Buddha?" She was pointing beyond concepts and explanations to direct experience. And Hayato, for all his learning, could not answer from that place of direct knowing. This is a trap that many of us fall into, not just with Buddhism, but with life itself. We think that understanding something intellectually means we truly know it. We read about love and think we understand love. We study peace and believe we know peace. We learn about presence and imagine we are present. But there is a vast difference between knowing about something and knowing it directly. The old woman knew Buddha not through study, but through living. When she worked in her garden, when she sat quietly, when she helped others, she was not thinking about Buddha nature. She was experiencing it. This direct knowing cannot be found in any book because it is not made of words or concepts. It is alive. It is felt. It is lived. Hayato's transformation began when he realized that all his knowledge was like a menu in a restaurant. The menu describes the food beautifully. It lists every ingredient, explains every flavor. But reading the menu, no matter how thoroughly, does not feed you. At some point, you must actually eat the food. You must have the direct experience that the menu only points toward. This is what the Zen masters mean when they teach about direct knowing. They are not saying that study is worthless. The menu has value. It helps you choose what to order. But the purpose of the menu is to lead you to the actual meal. The purpose of Buddhist teachings is to lead you to the actual experience of peace, of awakening, of your own true nature. Let us explore another story that shows how this direct knowing appears in the simplest circumstances, often more readily than in elaborate philosophy. In a monastery known for scholarly debate, the monks would gather every evening after their work to discuss Buddhist philosophy. They took great pride in their intellectual understanding. They could argue fine points of doctrine for hours, each monk trying to demonstrate the depth of his knowledge and the sharpness of his reasoning. A young monk named Goro particularly loved these debates. He was quick-witted and well-read, and he took satisfaction in winning arguments and proving other monks wrong. He would spend his days preparing clever points and studying obscure texts so that he could impress everyone during the evening discussions. One day, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Tekken, and he seemed different from the others. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with weathered hands that showed years of hard work. He spoke little, and during the evening debates, he would sit quietly in the back, listening carefully but never participating. This puzzled Goro. How could anyone sit through such fascinating discussions without wanting to contribute? After a week of watching Tekken's silence, Goro decided to draw him into the conversation. During a particularly intense debate about the nature of emptiness, Goro turned to the newcomer and said, "Brother Tekken, you have been listening to our discussions all week without saying a word. Surely you must have some opinion about whether all things are empty of inherent existence?" All eyes turned to Tekken, who looked slightly uncomfortable at being put on the spot. He was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I am sorry, but I do not really understand what you mean by inherent existence. Could you explain it to me?" Goro was delighted. Here was a chance to display his knowledge to someone who was clearly less educated than himself. He launched into a detailed explanation of emptiness philosophy, using technical terms and citing ancient masters. He spoke for 20 minutes. When he finished, Tekken nodded slowly. "Thank you for that explanation. But I am still not sure I understand. Can you give me an example from daily life?" Goro was happy to oblige. He spent another 20 minutes providing examples and elaborating on his understanding. But when he finished, Tekken asked another simple question that showed he still did not quite grasp the concept. This pattern continued for several evenings. Tekken would ask basic questions that seemed to reveal his lack of sophisticated understanding, and Goro would respond with increasingly elaborate explanations. The other monks began to see Tekken as somewhat simple, unable to grasp the complex ideas they debated so skillfully. But something strange began to happen. As Goro tried to explain these concepts to someone who seemed to know nothing about philosophy, he found himself having to examine his own understanding more carefully. Tekken's simple questions forced him to think about what he actually meant by the words he used so confidently. One evening, Tekken asked a question that stopped Goro completely. "Brother Goro, you have explained emptiness to me many times now, and I am grateful for your patience. But I wonder, when you are not explaining emptiness, when you are just living your daily life, how does this understanding change the way you wash dishes or sweep floors?" Goro opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. He realized that, despite all his sophisticated explanations, his understanding of emptiness had never actually changed how he experienced ordinary activities. It remained an intellectual concept, separate from his lived experience. "I am not sure," he admitted, feeling embarrassed for the first time in years. Tekken smiled gently. "Thank you for your honesty. You see, I spent 40 years as a farmer before coming here. I never learned the proper names for Buddhist concepts, and I cannot engage in philosophical debates. But when I plant seeds in soil and watch them grow, I experience something that might be what you call emptiness. When I see how crops depend on sun and rain and earth and human care, I understand what you might call interdependence." He paused, looking around at the gathered monks. "I came here hoping to learn the names for what I had already experienced in my daily work. But I am starting to think that maybe the names are not the most important thing. Maybe the experience is what matters." The room fell silent. For the first time, many of the monks questioned whether their sophisticated debates were bringing them closer to wisdom or further from it. "Do not misunderstand me," Tekken continued. "I am not saying study is worthless. I am grateful for all the explanations you have given me. But I wonder if sometimes we get so interested in talking about truth that we forget to live it." From that night forward, the character of the monastery's evening gatherings began to change. Instead of trying to win debates about concepts, the monks started sharing how their understanding affected their daily experience. Instead of competing to show off their knowledge, they began asking genuine questions about how to live with greater wisdom and compassion. Goro discovered that Tekkan's simple questions had been far more valuable than all his clever arguments. By forcing him to examine what his knowledge actually meant in practical terms, the older monk had helped him begin to transform intellectual understanding into lived wisdom. The story of Tekkan and Goro shows us another dimension of this teaching about direct knowing. Goro had spent years accumulating knowledge about Buddhist philosophy. He could explain complex concepts, win debates, impress others with his understanding. But Tekkan's simple questions revealed that this knowledge remained abstract, disconnected from actual life. Tekkan's approach was the opposite of what we might expect. Instead of trying to learn more information, he was trying to connect information to experience. Instead of seeking to impress others with knowledge, he was genuinely curious about how understanding could improve daily life. The questions Tekkan asked were more valuable than all of Goro's explanations because they pointed toward the gap between knowing about something and knowing something directly. We can memorize every teaching about compassion, but until we actually become more compassionate in our daily interactions, our knowledge remains incomplete. This teaching offers relief because it means we do not need to become scholars or experts to benefit from Buddhist wisdom. We do not need to understand every philosophical nuance or memorize complex texts. We simply need to take whatever understanding we have, however basic, and begin applying it to our actual experience. The deepest wisdom comes not from reading more books, but from paying more attention to life. Like Tekkan understanding interdependence through farming, we can discover profound truths through our ordinary activities when we bring genuine awareness to them. The washing of dishes can teach us about impermanence. The caring for others can teach us about compassion. The simple act of breathing can teach us about presence. This is what the old woman meant when she told Hayato that she knew Buddha through her daily work. She was not being poetic or mystical. She was describing direct experience. When she helped a neighbor, she was not thinking about Buddhist teachings on compassion. She was simply being compassionate. And in that actual experience of kindness, she knew something that no amount of reading about compassion could provide. When we stop trying to figure everything out with our thinking minds and start experiencing life directly with our whole being, we discover that wisdom was never hidden in books or teachings. It was always here, in the simple reality of this moment, in the breath moving through the body, in the feeling of being alive, in the natural compassion that arises when we truly see another person's struggle. Hayato spent 30 years studying what Buddha said, but he had never met Buddha in his own direct experience. Goro could explain emptiness perfectly, but he had never experienced how that understanding might transform ordinary activities. Both discovered that real wisdom requires moving from the head to the heart, from concept to experience, from knowing about to actually knowing. The gateway of direct knowing invites us to trust our own experience more than our ideas about experience, to value actual peace more than thoughts about peace, to seek real understanding more than impressive knowledge. This does not mean abandoning learning or study. It means using what we learn as a guide for how to live, not as a substitute for living. The old woman working in her garden, meeting Buddha in the simple act of tending plants. Tekkan asking basic questions, seeking to connect philosophy to the reality of sweeping floors and washing dishes. Both show us what embodied wisdom looks like. Both teach us that the peace we seek is not hiding in complex teachings waiting to be understood. It is here, in the direct experience of this moment, waiting to be lived. As you rest here now, notice the difference between thinking about peace and actually feeling peaceful. Between knowing that you should relax and actually releasing tension. Between understanding concepts about presence and being fully present. This difference is what these stories are pointing toward. This is the gateway of direct knowing. The Buddha taught for 40 years, but he never meant for people to stop with understanding his words. He meant for them to walk the path he described, to taste the freedom he pointed toward, to have their own direct experience of awakening. The teachings are beautiful and valuable, but they are not the destination. They are signposts along the way. Let yourself rest in this understanding now. You already know more than you think you know. You already understand more than you give yourself credit for. The question is not whether you have enough knowledge. The question is whether you are willing to live from what you already know, to embody wisdom rather than just understand it, to close your book sometimes and simply be present for the teaching that life itself offers in every moment. This is the gateway of direct knowing, not found in books or teachings, but in the living reality of your own experience, not achieved through study, but discovered through presence. Not complicated, but simple as breathing, as immediate as this moment, as close as your own heartbeat. We have traveled together through many teachings. We have explored impermanence and learned to trust the flow of change. We have opened the tender heart to compassion for ourselves and others. We have discovered that we are not as separate as we think. We have practiced being fully present for this moment. We have learned to hold life lightly, releasing our desperate grip. We have moved from knowing about to actually knowing. All of these gateways, all of these teachings, all of these stories have been pointing to one simple truth. The peace you seek is already here. It is not hidden. It is not far away. It is not something you must achieve through years of practice or perfect understanding. It is here, now, closer than your own breath. This is perhaps the most profound teaching in all of Zen Buddhism and also the most easily missed. We are so accustomed to seeking, to striving, to trying to become better that we overlook what is already present. We are like someone searching frantically for glasses that are resting on top of their head. The very thing we seek is what we are looking through. The Buddha sat under a tree and saw the morning star, and in that moment he awakened. But he did not become something he was not before. He simply recognized what had always been true. He saw that the peace, the freedom, the completeness he had been seeking was his own true nature. It had never been missing. He had simply been looking in the wrong direction. The Zen masters teach that this recognition is available to everyone in every moment. We do not need special circumstances or perfect conditions. We do not need to be wiser or better or more spiritual. We simply need to stop long enough to notice what has always been here. Like the stars that shine during the day but are hidden by the brightness of the sun, our true nature is always present, simply waiting to be recognized. Let us explore a story that shows how this recognition can dawn in the simplest circumstances. A young monk named Eiji had devoted his life to seeking enlightenment. He had studied at many temples, practiced with various teachers, and read countless texts about the path to awakening. He was sincere and dedicated, rising early each morning to meditate, spending long hours in practice, always searching for the profound realization that would finally bring him peace. But despite years of effort, A.G. felt no closer to his goal. Other monks spoke of profound insights and mystical experiences, but these eluded him. He began to believe that something was wrong with him, that he was somehow not suited for spiritual practice, that enlightenment was meant for others, but not for him. One spring morning, discouraged and exhausted from years of seeking, A.G. decided to leave the monastery and travel in search of a truly enlightened master. Someone who could give him the final teaching he needed, the missing piece that would unlock the door to awakening. He walked for many days, asking in each village if anyone knew of an enlightened teacher. Most people shook their heads or pointed him toward other monasteries. But in one small village, an old shopkeeper told him about a woman who lived in a simple cottage at the edge of town. "Her name is Chio," the shopkeeper said. "She is just an old woman who tends her garden and sits on her porch. But there is something about her, a peace. People say she is wise, though she has never claimed to be a teacher." A.G. found the cottage easily. It sat at the end of a quiet lane, surrounded by a well-tended garden. On the wooden porch, an elderly woman sat in the morning light, a cup of tea in her weathered hands. She looked up as A.G. approached, her face serene and welcoming. "Excuse me, honored grandmother," A.G. said, bowing respectfully. "I am searching for an enlightened teacher. The shopkeeper suggested I speak with you." Chio smiled gently. "Please, sit. You look tired from your journey." A.G. settled on the porch steps, grateful for the invitation to rest. "I have been seeking enlightenment for many years," he explained. "I have practiced diligently, studied with many teachers, but I still feel far from awakening. I am looking for someone who truly understands the deepest teachings, someone who can show me what I am missing." "And what do you think you are missing?" Chio asked, taking a slow sip of her tea. "The experience of enlightenment," A.G. said. "The profound realization that brings lasting peace. I know it exists because the texts describe it. But I have never experienced it myself." Chio was quiet for a moment, looking out at her garden where morning light touched the leaves of vegetables growing in neat rows. "Tell me, what does this moment feel like to you right now?" A.G. was surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Right now, sitting here on this porch, what is your actual experience?" A.G. paid attention to what he was feeling. "I am tired from walking. The morning air feels cool. I can hear birds singing. The porch is comfortable to sit on. And in this moment, are you suffering?" A.G. thought about it. "No, not right now." "Are you confused about what is real?" "No, I can see and feel everything clearly." "Are you failing to be alive, to be aware, to be present?" "No, I am here. I am aware." Chio smiled. "Then what exactly are you seeking?" The question landed like a stone in still water. A.G. opened his mouth to answer, but found he had no words. In this moment, he was not suffering. He was not confused. He was simply here, aware, alive. What was missing? "I have been sitting on this porch every morning for 40 years, Chio said softly. "Watching the sun rise, feeling the air change with the seasons, listening to birds and wind and rain. Each morning is the same. Each morning is completely new. And each morning I discover that everything I need is already here." She gestured to the garden, to the sky, to Eiji himself. You asked about enlightenment as if it is something far away that you must travel to find. But what if it is simply this? Simply being aware, simply being alive, simply meeting this moment without needing it to be different? Eiji felt something shift inside him. For years, he had been seeking a special experience, a dramatic realization, some feeling that would prove he had finally arrived. But sitting on this simple porch with this ordinary old woman, he suddenly saw the absurdity of his search. He had been complete all along. The awareness that was seeking enlightenment was itself the enlightenment he sought. But the texts describe profound experiences, Eiji protested weakly. Visions, insights, transformations. Some people have such experiences, Chiyo agreed. But they are not the point. They are like beautiful scenery along a road. The scenery may be lovely, but it is not the destination. The destination is simply arriving here, fully, in this moment that is always available. She poured another cup of tea and offered it to Eiji. When you drink this tea, do you need a special experience to make the drinking real? Or is the simple act of tasting, swallowing, feeling the warmth, is that not enough? Eiji accepted the cup and drank slowly. The tea was bitter and sweet at the same time. It warmed his throat. It was just tea, nothing special. And yet, paying full attention to it, it was completely satisfying. Complete in itself. You have spent years preparing for enlightenment, Chiyo said. But enlightenment is not something you prepare for. It is something you recognize. Like recognizing an old friend you had forgotten. It was always here. You simply stopped looking long enough to see. Eiji stayed with Chiyo for 3 days. Not to receive special teachings or learn secret practices, but simply to sit with her, to help with simple tasks, to eat meals together, to watch the light change across the garden. And in that simplicity, he began to understand. The peace he had been seeking was not something he needed to create or achieve. It was the natural state of awareness itself when it stopped seeking. The enlightenment he had been chasing was simply the recognition that there was nowhere to go, nothing to become, nothing missing from this moment. On the morning he left to return to his monastery, Chiyo walked him to the edge of her garden. "What will you tell your brothers when they ask what you learned?" she asked. Eiji smiled. "I will tell them I learned nothing, and that nothing was exactly what I needed to learn." Years later, Eiji became a respected teacher himself. When students came to him seeking enlightenment, he would sometimes tell them about the old woman who taught him the most important lesson by teaching him nothing at all. "The greatest teacher I ever met," he would say, "was someone who simply showed me that what I was seeking was what I was looking through all along." This story shows us the culmination of all the teachings we have explored together. Eiji spent years seeking enlightenment, believing it was something he needed to find or achieve. But Chiyo helped him see that he was already awake, already aware, already complete. The seeking itself was the only thing preventing him from recognizing this. This is what all the gateways have been pointing toward. When we truly understand impermanence, we stop trying to freeze time and recognize the perfection of constant flow. When we open the tender heart, we discover that our capacity to feel is itself a form of completeness. When we see through the illusion of separation, we recognize our true nature is spacious and free. When we practice presence, we come home to the only moment that exists. When we let go, we discover we were never holding anything real in the first place. When we move from concept to experience, we find that truth was never hidden in ideas. All of these teachings lead here, to the simple recognition that you are already home, already whole, already at peace. Not because you have achieved something, but because that is your nature. Like water being wet or fire being warm, awareness is naturally peaceful when it stops struggling against itself. Notice right now, in this moment, what is actually missing. Not what you think should be different, but what is actually absent from your direct experience. The awareness that notices these words, that feels the breath, that experiences being alive, is it lacking anything essential? This recognition does not mean all your problems disappear. Chio still had to tend her garden, deal with the weather, grow old. Eiji still had to navigate daily life, face challenges, experience both joy and sorrow. But underneath all of these changing circumstances was something that remained stable. The simple fact of awareness itself, of being alive, of being here. Let us explore one more story that shows how this recognition can transform a lifetime of seeking into a lifetime of simply being. In a large monastery, there lived a master named Ren who had been teaching students for 50 years. He was known throughout the region for his deep knowledge and his ability to answer even the most difficult questions about spiritual practice. His lectures were attended by hundreds, and his books were studied in temples across the land. But as Master Ren grew older, something began to change in his teaching. Instead of giving long, elaborate explanations, he started responding to questions with simpler and shorter answers. Instead of assigning complex practices, he began suggesting that students simply sit quietly and pay attention to their breath. His senior students were puzzled by this change. They had come expecting profound teachings and sophisticated practices, but their master seemed to be offering them nothing but basic instructions they had learned years earlier. One evening, a senior student approached Master Ren with concern. "Master, forgive me for asking, but your recent teaching seems so different from before. Have you forgotten the deeper aspects of the Dharma? Are you feeling well?" Master Ren invited his student to sit with him on the temple porch, where they could watch the evening stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me," the master said, "when you first came to study here 20 years ago, what were you seeking?" "I was seeking enlightenment, liberation from suffering, understanding of ultimate reality," the student replied. "And have you found these things?" The student hesitated. "I have learned much, and my practice has deepened, but I still feel like there is something more I need to understand or achieve." Master Ren pointed to a bright star that had just become visible. "Do you see that star?" "Yes, Master." "What is it doing?" The student looked confused. "It is shining." "Is it trying to shine? Is it working hard to be bright? Is it seeking to become a better star?" "No, it is just naturally shining." "And yet," Master Ren said softly, "its light has traveled across vast distances to reach your eyes. Without any effort or seeking, it illuminates the darkness for anyone who looks up." They sat in peaceful silence as more stars appeared across the clear night sky. "When I was a young teacher," Master Ren continued, "I thought my job was to give students complicated practices and profound insights. I believed that enlightenment was something difficult that required years of special effort. But as I have grown older, I have discovered something simpler. He gestured toward the field of stars above them. Look at this perfect teaching that appears every clear night. The stars do not struggle to shine. The sky does not effort to be spacious. The night does not try to be peaceful. Yet, here is the most complete demonstration of our true nature anyone could ask for. The student looked up at the stars with new understanding. You are saying that our true nature is like the stars, naturally luminous without effort? I am not saying anything, Master Ren replied with a gentle laugh. But what do you experience when you stop trying to figure everything out and simply rest in awareness, like the space that holds all these stars? As they continued sitting together in the quiet night, the student gradually felt his mind settling into a natural stillness. The questions and seeking that usually filled his thoughts seemed to dissolve into the peaceful vastness of the evening. He was not trying to meditate or achieve any particular state. He was simply present, like the stars simply shining. "Master," he said quietly, "I think I understand why your teaching has become so simple." "Why is that?" "Because what we are looking for is already so simple that complex teachings only cover it up." Master Ren nodded. "After 50 years of teaching, I have learned that the most profound truth is the most obvious one. Students come seeking complicated wisdom, but what they really need is to remember how to rest in their own natural awareness." He stood slowly, preparing to go inside for the evening. The stars have been giving the same teaching every night for millions of years. They shine simply because that is their nature, not because they are trying to achieve anything. When we discover that we too can simply be what we are, without struggling to become something else, we find the peace that has always been available. That night, the student slept more deeply than he had in years. Not because he had learned something new, but because he had finally relaxed into something old and natural and always present. He had discovered that the peace he had been seeking was the peace of awareness itself, not as an achievement, but as his fundamental nature. Breathe naturally. Feel how awareness is already here, already peaceful, not needing anything added or taken away. The story of Master Ren shows us how a lifetime of teaching can lead to the simplest truth. After 50 years of explaining complex philosophy and assigning elaborate practices, he discovered that what he had been trying to lead people toward was so simple that all the complexity was actually hiding it. Like stars that shine naturally without trying, our true nature is already complete, already peaceful, already aware. We do not need to add anything to it or achieve anything special. We simply need to recognize what has always been here. This is why Master Ren's teaching became simpler over time. Not because he forgot the complex teachings, but because he saw more clearly what those teachings were pointing toward. All the philosophy, all the practices, all the explanations were just different ways of saying, "Look here. See what you already are. Recognize the peace that is your nature." The young student expected that after 20 years of practice, he would need even more advanced teachings. But what he actually needed was to stop seeking and start recognizing. To stop trying to become enlightened and start noticing that awareness itself is already awake. This is the gateway of coming home. Not arriving somewhere new, but recognizing where you have always been. Not becoming something different, but seeing clearly what you already are. Not achieving peace after years of effort, but discovering that peace is your natural state when you stop struggling. Feel the simple fact of being aware right now. This awareness that experiences these words, that feels the body, that knows you are alive, is it not already complete? Is it waiting to become enlightened? Or is it already the enlightenment you seek? Everything we have explored in this journey together has been pointing here. The impermanence that teaches us to trust. The suffering that opens the heart. The recognition of no separation. The practice of presence. The art of letting go. The wisdom of direct knowing. All of these are not steps on a long journey to somewhere else. They are all different ways of recognizing what is already here. Chiyo, sitting on her porch for 40 years, discovering each morning that everything she needs is already present. Master Ren simplifying his teachings after 50 years, recognizing that the profound is obvious. Eiji discovering that the enlightenment he sought was what he was seeking through. All of them found the same truth in different ways. The truth that you are already home. This does not mean your life becomes perfect. You will still face challenges, experience both joy and sorrow, navigate difficulties. But underneath all of these changing circumstances is something that does not change. The simple awareness that experiences everything. The consciousness that is reading these words right now. The presence that has been here your entire life, witnessing everything, never absent, never truly troubled. Let your body sink a little deeper into rest. Feel how you are held by this moment, by awareness itself, without needing to do anything or become anyone. The seeking can stop now. Not because you have finally achieved what you were seeking, but because you recognize that seeking was looking for something that was never actually lost. Like Eiji searching for glasses that were on his head, we have been looking everywhere for a piece that was looking through us all along. This recognition is gentle. It is not dramatic or special. It is like coming home after a long journey and finding everything exactly where you left it. Familiar. Simple. Complete. The door was never locked. You simply forgot that home was always available. All the teachings of Zen Buddhism, all the stories and practices and wisdom accumulated over centuries point toward this moment. This simple, ordinary, completely extraordinary moment of being aware, being alive, being here. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be achieved. You are already what you have been seeking. The gateway of coming home stands open, not because you have finally earned the right to enter, but because it was never closed. You are already inside, already home, already at peace. You simply need to recognize this truth. To stop seeking long enough to see what has always been here. Rest in this understanding. Let it settle into you like gentle rain soaking into earth. The peace you seek is not somewhere else, not in some future moment after you have practiced enough, or understood enough, or become enough. It is here, now, in the simple fact of your own awareness. Complete. Whole. Already home. This is the final gateway. Or perhaps it is the recognition that there were never any gates at all, only the journey of returning to where you have always been. Like the stars that shine without effort, like awareness itself that is naturally peaceful, you are already what you have been seeking. Simply recognize this truth, and the seeking can finally come to rest. We have walked together through ancient wisdom that has guided countless hearts toward peace. Through teachings about change and compassion, presence and release, knowing and being. All of these words, all of these stories, have been pointing beyond themselves. Like fingers pointing at the moon, they have been directing your attention towards something that cannot be captured in language. The living peace that is your own true nature. You do not need to remember everything we explored tonight. The teachings are not meant to be carried in your mind like a heavy load. They are meant to dissolve into your being like medicine absorbed into the body. The understanding will work in you naturally in its own time without any effort on your part. As you rest now, know that you have received something precious. Not new information to add to what you already know, but a remembering of what you have always been. Seeds have been planted in the fertile ground of your awareness. They will grow in their own season, without your worry or tending. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. The path continues not through striving, but through the simple allowing of life to unfold. Like the morning star that taught the Buddha, life itself will continue to teach you moment by moment if you remain open to its lessons. May you rest deeply in the peace that is already yours. May you wake tomorrow with the gentle recognition that you are exactly where you need to be. May you meet each moment with the kindness and wisdom that these teachings have pointed toward. Thank you for walking this path with us. Thank you for opening your heart to these ancient truths. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.